Hello there. This is a recap of session 41 of my Castles and Crusades campaign. For this session we had 5 players. We had the characters Rhonin, Cosmo, Lork, Spraull, and Barry. They're in the City of Dornval, and they've tracked these hooved footprints from a tenement building in Shantytown, which is the slums of the city, where everybody in the building had been killed, and they tracked it to a sewer entrance. The sewer entrance we picked up right there from where we left off in the last session. The sewer entrance, they go to open it. Lork tries to open it. It's extremely heavy, and I kind of made an emphasis on this. They didn't pick up on it, I don't think, but it became a team effort to get it open, which they eventually did with some help, some teamwork. They got it open. But there was a reason why it was kind of an element of foreshadowing for something later that they learn, and they may not have picked up on it, but that's what it was there for. So they descend into the sewers, which some of the characters are really not happy about, but they don't have any options. In the sewers, through some more tracking checks, Lork is able to keep tracking this, whatever this thing is. There's these large hooved prints that they're finding in muck and slime, and they're down there for quite a while, and they end up going into like a very old section of the sewers, and Spraull's able to recognize this because he's a dwarf, and he can recognize that the stonework here is much older than what they first encountered. And they eventually come to a cistern of sorts, and in the cistern, as they're working their way around it, they see this large lump like in the cistern, and they're a little the whole party becomes kind of nervous about that, waiting to get attacked by something because they hadn't been attacked. And it turns out to be a dead Otiug that had been recently killed, and when they look at it, it's just some really large, like, just hack marks into it, but it's quite clearly dead and no longer a threat. So they proceed on. While doing this, Lork's in the lead. That's kind of the usual thing that they do. He moves up ahead of them. Because of his boots, he can move silently, and then he's followed by Cosmo and Spraull a little bit behind that. Spraull has no means, little possibility of moving even quietly, so he hangs back a little bit, but he doesn't want them to get too far ahead. And then it'll be Barry after that, where he can be protected in the middle of the party. And then Rhonin usually pulls up the rear with his bow, acting as like a rear security, and Overwatch too if he can get on some high ground. They keep traveling deeper into the sewers, and eventually Lork sees light coming up ahead, and he rounds this corner, and he sees some torchlight down this long straight sewer passage, and there's a man standing there with a crossbow, and he's standing in the torchlight. He kind of walks out of this hole in the wall and is standing there. So it starts out where the action of the session started, and Lork tries to charge, and he runs towards the guy, but I had him, because of the terrain, I had him make a dexterity saving throw to see if he would slip, because it's slimy on the passage. And sure enough, he fails his dexterity saving throw and falls into the sewerage. That led to a whole bunch of things. Other people charging. Cosmo actually was able to hide just outside the range of the torchlight. Spraull came running in. He slipped and fell, but he didn't fall into the sewage. He stopped just shy of it. Barry comes running in to help, because there's cries of alarm and kill him. And from they hear more voices coming from wherever that hole in the wall leads. So they all go charging in. Barry ends up rolling really badly on his dexterity saving throw, and he flies through the air and cracks his head on the side of the edge of the passage before he falls into the sewage as well. They eventually collect themselves and dispatch. There's 2 guards shooting crossbows at him, and they eventually dispatched those guys. It was a fun encounter. The whole dexterity saving throw was just something that I thought of. I hadn't pre-planned. When they started charging, I was like, oh yeah, this would be interesting. So it shook out pretty good and made the combat a little more interesting. These guards really, compared to them, are not very tough. So it made it a little bit more challenging, but using not really that tough of adversaries. So they defeat those two guys. There was some joking about, hey, do these guys have like any sort of symbology on them showing that they're members of the cult of Meldeth, or did we just kill members of the public works? So that was kind of a joke going around the table, which was pretty funny. And they did have necklaces with the symbol of Meldeth on them, so the party felt like they weren't just killing city workers. They ended up I did that combat Theater of the Mind. There wasn't a board for it. Now, I had originally built this board here, which we did use later, but this was kind of a combination of, like, this was the cistern and this was the battle. But the way I described it, there was a 90-degree turn here that came in, and then they had about 60 plus feet to get to this. So I did that whole encounter Theater of the Mind, just inspired by this. But when they go through here, this is the room that they come into. And in there, they don't find much. They find a table, a few chairs, and apparently these guys were guarding this entrance and just playing cards, killing time. They didn't really expect anybody to come this way, but the tracks that Lork has been trailing do lead into here. And they come into this room, and this all plays out later, which we'll get to, but they come into this room, and I give them the passage goes left or right, and the tracks, which they're able to still follow, they do lead to the left, so the party chooses to go left. So they go down this passage for quite a ways, and it turns into a combination of laid stone, like the old stonework under the city, and some natural work stone. Very, very old, but it leads down into this passage here, this sideways passage, and they come to these double doors, which are closed. And one of the things to note that I had them note or describe to them is that when they got down closer to this area, Spraull was able to really pick up on the fact that it was warmer here, and the stone felt warmer and not painful, but just there was a warmth to it. And when they got to that door, Cosmo, doing his rogue stuff, he listens at doors, which he did at these other doors too, and they didn't hear anything. And this one, he didn't hear anything either, but he could tell, like, getting close to the metal doors, that they were warm as well. So they enter here, and there's this chamber, and they make jokes about, like, oh, it could be lava. They were wondering what that heat was coming from. Well, when they come in here, there actually was this magma here, and which will get explained later. But they see this room, and when they come in this room, there's a few things that they really know, that it's warm because of this terrain, and it there's a smell of like sulfur in the air and of blood, and throughout this chamber there's these piles of corpses. And oh, to back up, I missed an encounter. When they went down this long passage, they encountered 4 more cultists, and these cultists were pulling carts, these bloody carts, and they were able to lay an ambush for those cultists, and they did that through magic, mostly. Barry turned Cosmo invisible, and then he cast Rope Trick, which I guess creates this extra dimensional pocket that the rest of the party hid in. So when the cultists with the carts got in underneath them, Barry hit the last guy, one of the guys in the cart, with a backstab, and then the rest of the party attacked, and they made really, really short work. One guy tried to make it all the way back to the doors, but I'm pretty sure he got dropped. They all died, but I'm pretty sure he got dropped by probably Rhonin shooting an arrow at him. But yeah, so that happened. So they get down to this chamber. Fast forward again, and this is what they see. So. And at the end of this chamber, they see this guy, and I described him before I showed the miniature, but this is the miniature I painted for him. He's a big dude, and he's got like this huge cleaver, and he's got a hook for another hand, and he has hooved feet, so they know they found the guy they've been tracking. And he just laughs. He's like chewing on, like using that hook to hook bodies and eat them. And he gets a big smile when the party walks in, because he's got, and basically he's like, oh, I got fresh meat, or something to that effect. And they come in with Lork in the lead, obviously, onto this bridge. And Cosmo actually, he goes around, he starts to go around this way, which was a smart move on his part. But this guy literally flies down to here and confronts the party on the bridge, and Lork charges him, and the fight is on. This was a really tough fight, and this is a demon, and I had, I don't remember if I actually had him roll or not, but Spraull, because of his religious training, and he's a cleric, he recognizes this is obviously a demon. None of the party members had ever faced a demon before. I take that back. Barry and Lork have actually faced demons before. When they went to the Balthor Doom ruins, they fought a demon outside the ruins, but it's pretty new to most of them. And this guy starts casting spells, and the first spells he cast was this incendiary mist, and it just puts a thing here, and I think they took some damage, and they couldn't see, so they had to get out of that. And that's when, like, Lork charged ahead. They exchanged some blows, spells. He has spell resistance, so he resisted some spells. But I think, like, Barry was able to get some spell. He got most of his spells through. I know Spraull's spells were dual purpose. They would benefit the party and hinder him. But they didn't work on him. His spell resistance prevented it. He ended up, the next spell he cast was Meteor Swarm, and he just, is different versions of it in the Cast of Crusades book. It's actually a fairly complex spell with several different options of how you can do it. So he took basically option B, where these huge meteorite balls just blasted down here, and he nailed everybody in the party except for Cosmo, who had moved over to this side here, and was trying to work his way around. This definitely affected the party. Spraull was dropped, and he was at -5 hit points. He had failed his earliest save from earlier spells, so he was already pretty damaged. And everybody, he was the only one to go down, but it hurt everybody. And then him and the demon and Lork started just going toe to toe, and he was doing a lot of damage to Lork with that cleaver. And at one point, Lork drank a potion of healing, one of the more powerful ones, and healed up. But one of the things I told him was that, like, his wounds from the cleaver weren't healing. Like, they stopped bleeding, but they're not healing. So this was basically a big +3 cleaver of wounding, large size, so which comes into play later. And so the battle's on, and they're battling back and forth, and Lork was, per the usual, being the frontline fighter, he was really down on hit points and almost dead. I don't think he cast another spell. I didn't get another spell off with him. He just went in with melee and hook attacks. There was one, he used that hook, and he swung at Lork and actually missed, and just gouged a rent across his Ankeg armor breastplate that he wears, and didn't damage it to where it actually affected the mechanics of the armor, but it was more for flavor. But it was a close miss, so that's how I described it. And then ultimately they defeat him. It was a really tough battle. The players and myself really enjoyed it, and their feedback was they were thinking that they were probably going to get killed. They quickly go to using what they can to revive Spraull. They bring him back up and get him healed up, and then they start healing each other. And then they realize that Lork has injuries that he cannot heal. That they can any of the hits that he took from that cleaver can only be healed naturally. Like the magic healing that he got stopped it from continually bleeding. He was going to lose like a hit point around, but it stopped that, but it couldn't heal it. So they bandaged up his other wounds the best they could, and they start looting the place. And the way I described it is the demon, he dropped a few items that they used detect magic on. One was the cleaver. He was also wearing a belt, and in his loot he had a set of boots. They don't do anything with those right at the moment, but they do keep them. And then he had a bunch of coin and gems. When I roll, a lot of times when I roll treasure, I'll put specific things in the game, you know, that I want to see there. But for the most of this campaign, my loot has been randomly rolled and based on the treasure types and stuff that are in the Monsters and Treasures book. So that was and I didn't really have stats for that demon, but I used the Nalfeshni stats from the Fiendish, I think it's called the Fiendish Codex, or it's a book of fiends that Castle Crusades have. They're actually in the process of printing a new version of it, but I used the Nalfeshni stats for him. He wasn't specifically a Nalfeshni, but that's what I used. So it was a pretty powerful demon. Although, I will say, like with a party like this, with 5 guys, decent levels, like this, you know, Lork's 7th level, the lowest was 5th. Like, his spells did a lot of damage, and, you know, that was an equalizer. But, like, when they get into melee with him, yeah, he could hit, and he would do a lot of damage, and he would hit, because I gave him magical weapons and stuff. But, like, the hit dice level is low, so I almost gave him some minions. I'm kind of glad I didn't, because I think that would have really changed the shape of how that battle shook out. And it was, I think it was pretty much perfect the way it was, ended up being. But like, they started chewing through his hit points really fast. I did increase his hit points to make it a little bit more challenging, so he'd actually be around longer, because they just kept hitting him. And I gave him a few more hit points, which just extended the battle, and that it worked really well that way. So they collect all that, they get healed up, and they're like, all right, we need to get out of here, because we're not doing, you know, we're not in great shape. You know, a lot of spells used, a lot of damage taken, damage that they can't heal. Lork being their primary melee fighter, like him not being 100% is not good. And then they kind of surprised me, because they're like, well, we don't want to go back out the way we came. That wasn't, they didn't view that as a good idea. They're like, well, we know we could have gone right back when we first entered, and we didn't. So maybe we go up through that way and find another way out of here. So in my head, I know what's to the right. They have no idea. So it surprised me that they went into the unknown, but that's what players do. And I knew, like, going into the right was going into, like, where the cult's hideout was. So Tristana, the cult leader that they're looking for, I knew she was, like, there, and she had cultists, and she had a few other, like, minor demons with her. So I was like, this is going to be interesting. I don't know how this is going to shake out. So I also was rolling, like, random 6-sided dice for, like a random encounter. And on a 1, I'd come up with something, and I did roll a 1. And what I had happen is they were making their way back. The dead guards had been discovered, so Tristana was going down to see if they could find out who did it. So she was bringing this troop. She had all these guys, she had all these cultists here, and then a little horde of dretches, and then herself. And this guy, the odd man out here. So the party ends up meeting her right about in this area of the hallway. I don't remember who won first initiative. I think it was the party, because I know Barry opened up with a fireball, and he dropped a fireball on her and killed all of her dretches in one hit. They're not very powerful at all, and did damage to her, but she made her saving throw. And then the other thing that happened with that, which I think definitely alarmed Barry, was the damage she took, he also took. So what had happened is she had precast a spell on herself, whereas if she takes damage from a foe, the foe also takes that damage. So he took some damage from that. Lork charges in to fight the cultists, and the battle's on. This was a really fun battle. Above table, like I think one of my weaknesses as a game master, and I use them a lot, but I'm not very good at running enemy spellcasters. So I don't think I am. Like I don't know. I don't think I prep them enough. So I feel really good about how the battles turn out. But this one ended up being pretty good. They're fighting. The rest of the party's doing what they can, laying out these cultists. She moves up a little bit, and then casts a spell, Wind Wall, right here. So a Wind Wall will block any arrows, so it kind of effectively keeps Rhonin from shooting her. It blocks them 100 arrows and bolts, like 100%, and then I think like hurled stuff like axes or knives or spears, they have a penalty to hit, but arrows and bolts do not get through. So spells go back and forth, And I had a few spells that I wanted to use, but the problem was I had kind of screwed myself by nobody was in range. Like the range, because I above board, I wanted to focus. She wanted to focus on Barry because she knew he was a spellcaster. Um, but none of the spells that she had, I could actually reach him with because she wasn't going to go past her wind wall, her protection. So one of the spells she had was Phantasmal Killer, which I wanted to use on Barry, but realized I couldn't because he was out of range. And then I realized Lork is in range. So she casts that spell on Lork. He's getting ready to cut his way through her minions. She does recognize that he's a serious threat. So she casts Phantasmal Killer on him, which in Castle of Crusades requires an intelligence save, which is not a prime attribute for Lork, and he fails his save. And when he fails his save, he dies. So the spell manifests his worst fear, and his current worst fear would have been the demon, because when he got the killing blow on the demon, you know, as demons do, they return to the abyss. He promised Lork that he would remember him, and he sees this image of this demon coming back to get him and telling him, "Hey, I told you I'd remember you," and then he dies. And the whole party's like, "Oh crap!" Like our primary melee fighter just went down, and you know, the players knew that he was dead. My son's reaction to that, I was interested to see what it was going to be. It was awesome because he was just like, "Oh, okay then," and he's like, "Well, I'm going to go get a snack while you guys deal with this." No moping about or anything like you hear some people talk about. It was just like, "Nope, it happens. We'll figure it out." And moving on. So they end up battling on, and Cosmo actually, a little backstory for folks who might be new or forgotten. Cosmo has a specific grudge. Grudge probably isn't a strong enough word. He desires vengeance against this Tristana, the head of the cult of Meldeth, because she killed his brother. His brother was the sheriff of a nearby Moss Haven, a nearby settlement to where the party spends most of their time in Arden. He was actually the sheriff, and she sacrificed him, carved his face off to use in some sort of ritual, which they had discovered that's what she does. So Cosmo typically doesn't like to get into combat directly, but for this one, he was like, it's definitely happened. There was a few cultists left. He charges past them to get to her. Oh, let me back that up a little bit, actually. My apologies. During all this spell casting, Barry, this was actually clutch. Barry casts Hold Person on her, and I get a saving throw, and I roll a natural one. So she fails her save. She's stuck, you know, frozen in place behind her wind wall. And Cosmo then charges. He runs past two or three cultists. One of them actually hits him on the way by, and he ignores it. He sees, you know, his brother's killer, and he's coming in to finish her off. And so he gets up behind her. That takes a round or two, although he has really good movement for a halfling. And he gets in position behind her. So when it's his turn again, he's like, you know, he wants to backstab her. And in Castle Crusades, you got to make like either a move silently or a hide in shadows roll. And I'm like, you don't have to do any of that. She's frozen. Like you can have your backstab. Like she's defenseless. So he stabs her, does quite a bit of damage. He takes damage because that spell is still in effect that she has, but used up all the points. So the way Chris described it, he stabbed her like right in the kidney, and then all of a sudden he feels this pain in his own kidney, and he's like cries out in pain, but he doesn't care. Like he's got his brother's killer right here, and he's going to finish her off. The rest of the party makes short work. One of the cultists actually comes to defend her. There was two left, and one of them had run back to help. I think it was Rhonin picked him off with his oath bow, keeping Cosmo freed up to focus on her. And in his next turn, this was awesome. He describes grabbing her and pulling her back, like tipping her, and she's stiff as a board. So he just lays her down on the ground and then straddles her. And he's just looking at her, and basically he's like, you know, you killed my brother and you're going to die the same way. And he carves her face off. And I described, like, he could see her, like, fear and helplessness in her eyes because she could not move. And he carves her face off and then, like, holds it up like a trophy. So it was awesome. The whole table was like, this is just what an ending. And I did make a mention that there might be a slight shifting in Cosmo's alignment, which Chris is a really great player. He's like, yeah, that's probably true. But he got his vengeance, and it was really good. And that was the end. They finished off the last cultists, and that was, we were kind of running out of time, so for the evening, it was getting late. So narratively, I just described that they're able to go through. They loot her, of course. They're adventurers. And they loot her. They get a few magic items off her. They don't know what they are, but they take them. There's a couple rings, an axe, a battle axe, and a chain shirt. And then they go through the stronghold, and then they find these entrances that lead up into abandoned buildings in the city above, which was kind of their forte. They did the same thing in Arden. They had tunnels under the city that led up into abandoned houses and stuff. And buildings, and that's kind of how they operated. And in one of these rooms, they find this room here was, I didn't put anything in it, but it was described as like a little temple area dedicated to Meldeth, the God Slayer. And then they find a secret entrance that leads up into a separate room building above, which turned out to be Tristana's quarters. And in there, they find more treasure. And they also find some notes, and she talked about in her notes that she was going to focus attacks on the Temple of the Golden Spear, which is a temple dedicated to the god Cassidius, which is the blood red god. And in the lore, my lore, he, for my setting, he was the god during the Infernal War that defeated Meldeth, the god slayer, and banished him back to the abyss. So there's a feud between those two, religions. And they also found notes of her talking about not letting the cult of the veiled god get a foothold in Dornval. Like, she viewed him as competition. Nobody had any clue who or what the cult of the veiled god was, but that was just something they discovered. And that's where we ended the session. Really good session. I have to say, like, the whole campaign's been a lot of fun, but the last 3 sessions have been really, really good. Like, we've all really enjoyed them. The guys, our chat message that we have on Facebook Messenger was like lit up for the entire next day with the guys talking about the session and things they want to do. Top of the list is get Lork resurrected. So that's going to have an effect. Oh, in hindsight, they end up identifying later on those magic items. So the demon had, the cleaver was a cleaver of wounding, basically, but it's large size and none of the characters can use it without penalty. So at first they talk about throwing it in the magma, which that magma stuff went away. So that was kind of like a lair effect that the demon was causing. They opt not to do that, and I think ultimately what they decided is they're going to keep that cleaver, and then when they meet up with Pounder, which is my friend Steve's alternate character, he's a half-ogre barbarian. He's a barbarian. They're going to give it to him because he can use it because he's large size, because I do allow large size creatures, player characters in my game. I always have. Just 'cause I wouldn't allow like a whole party of them, but one being kind of unique, I think is pretty cool. I've liked it ever since AD&D and Half Ogre. So they took that cleaver. The belt was actually a belt of stone giant strength. That was part of the reason, like, that grate, even though the demon himself is really strong, that grate was so hard to move, but it wasn't hard for the demon to move because he's extra strong. That's going to go to Lork when he's back. And the boots were boots of striding and springing, and Cosmo is taking those. It'll add some movement. He'll get an extra 10 feet of movement, so he'll be, for a halfling, he's going to be buzzing. He'll probably have the best movement on the board. With Tristana, one of the rings was a ring of minor spell storing, so that went to Barry. Barry and Spraull, my friends Matt and Dave, who play those characters, debated back and forth on who should get what, because the other ring was a ring of protection +2, and I think Spraull wound up with a ring of protection. Because they were both like, either one of these rings would, you know, Barry already has a ring of protection, +1, and, you know, the extra spell capacity would have been good for either of them, but ultimately they decided that would go to Barry. Cool. What else was there? The battle axe was a +1 battle axe. I don't know what they'll do with that. The chain shirt was a +1 chain shirt. Yeah, but that was it. It was a real good session, and we really good. Like the last 3 sessions have been really, really good. They ended this arc of the Cult of Meldeth, at least for now. Who knows what'll happen down the road. So now that they're in the driving seat again, as far as what they want to do, and that was part of the chatter yesterday on our message board, on our message chat. What do you guys want to do? Like, the beauty of the West Marches is they're in the driver's seat for the most part, and ultimately they decided they want to focus on getting more pieces of the raw to 7 parts. They got the first part in the previous session. Spraull carries that, so that's going to be their focus. So I've already started prepping that session, which will happen later next month. And hopefully we'll maybe get some other sessions in between. I got some ideas. Maybe we can run some different characters, hopefully. I got to talk to some guys about that. But yeah, it's been really good. And the last 3 sessions, like I said, were really good. I wasn't getting bored with this campaign at all, not in the least, but the last 3 have just really fired me up to put even more focus on it. So hopefully we'll see some more stuff coming from it soon. Yeah, so that was it. And I appreciate everybody watching, and catch you at the next one.